Believing that you're destined for heaven when you're not would be the most tragic self-deception. David Servant's book, The Great Gospel Deception, will help you be sure that heaven will be your eternal home. Order your copy at heavenword.tv.
Okay, welcome back to the Olivet Discourse in Matthew chapter 24. As we're working our way through here, we recognize the fact that there's kind of an overlap in themes. Jesus is definitely talking in some sense about what's going to precede the destruction of the temple, 70 AD, but in another sense and in a big sense, he's talking about what's going to precede his second coming and the end of the age. And we've talked about this already. Now, there was a prediction, a foretelling by Jesus in the Olivet Discourse of the coming persecution. And if you take him literally when he says, this is what's going to happen to you, well, we know that he was speaking to Peter, James, Andrew, and John. And if we take him literally, then we have to say this only happened to them. But he said things like, you'll be hated by all nations on account of my name. And it just doesn't seem like that fit Peter, James, Andrew, and John, but it certainly fits what we know is going to happen in the coming persecution of the people of God during the time of the Antichrist. And we've talked about that, okay? I think that Mark and Luke's gospel bring out some things that, you don't find in Matthew's gospel of that coming persecution. And it's good for us to study this because maybe right now, you and I are not facing life-threatening persecution. Most of the persecution that we experience is rather mild by comparison to what some Christians around the world experience and have experienced and are going to experience. But we need to ask ourselves the question, how would I fare if I faced life-threatening persecution? Would I continue to follow the Lord? What if my children betrayed me and turned me over to the authorities? Would I renege and deny Christ in order to gain back my kids or my parents? These are the things that Jesus talks about are going to happen. There is a coming persecution against the Church of Jesus Christ worldwide. It's going to weed out all the phonies from those who are true. It's going to weed out all those who are just weak from those who remain faithful. Jesus said in Matthew 24, verse 13, the one who endures to the end, he will be saved. And he's not talking about he who makes it to the end of this tribulation and persecution, because he already said, many of you will be killed and give your lives. And so that is you're faithful until the end, whatever end it might be, your end or the end of this terrible time of tribulation. Now, take a look here in Mark chapter 13 and beginning in verse number 9. Be on your guard, for they will deliver you to the courts. You'll be flogged in the synagogues, and you'll stand before governors and kings for my sake as a testimony to them. Well, we actually know that to some degree that happened. We don't know what degree it happened to Peter, James, Andrew, and John, but it happened to the Apostle Paul. It's all recorded in the book of Acts. He stood before governors and kings and testified before them, okay? But when you're taken before courts, that means they have a legal case against you. You're breaking the secular law. And you can see how that fits very perfectly into the time of the Antichrist, when he's a worldwide ruler who everyone believes is actually God, and everyone's bowing before him, showing him their allegiance. They could be dragging people who refuse to take his mark into court. Well, it's an opportunity then to share our faith and probably ultimately to give our lives for the sake of the gospel. And that's the important thing. Verse number 13, the gospel must first be preached to all the nations. And one of the ways it's going to happen is when Christians are in court, okay? When they arrest you and hand you over, do not worry beforehand about what you are to say, but say whatever is given to you in that hour, for it is not you who speak, but it is the Holy Spirit. And we know that happened in the book of Acts. Prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, the apostles were taken at times, before the official governing bodies, and they gave these marvelous speeches, and everyone recognized, wow, these are uneducated men, and look how eloquently they speak. That was the Holy Spirit in them. But that promise has application to you and me as well, if we find ourselves in similar circumstances. Okay, keep reading. Here's the great betrayal, the great apostasy that we read about in Matthew's gospel. Verse number 12, brother will betray brother to death, and a father his child, and children will rise up against parents and have them put to death. Now, I'm sure that there's been spatterings of that throughout all of Christian history, but, what motivates someone to betray his brother, so that it results in the execution of that brother? What motivates a father to turn over his child to the authorities and it costs that child his life? What children turn over their parents to the authorities and as a result have them put to death? These are extenuating circumstances that describe a time of horrendous deception and a great an allegiance by certain people that is unnatural to the degree that they will betray their closest family members, their brothers and sisters and children and parents, because they've got a heart allegiance to something else that way supersedes their allegiance to their kin. What could that be? Well, certainly the end times describes that kind of fervent faith that people will have who are deceived by the Antichrist and in, believing that he's God. And so if God says anyone who doesn't take the mark should forfeit their life because they're a God hater, go and search out and find all the unbelievers. That is, they'll be calling the believers, the true believers, we would be called the unbelievers in that time because we're not following the Antichrist. Okay, so again, I think that that's what is being described here. And although it has some application to what preceded the 70 AD destruction of Jerusalem, I think it's really a lot of end time stuff. Okay, all right. Next time in Matthew, we're going to get into this very intriguing verse about how Matthew says that Jesus said, when you see the abomination of desolation in the holy place, here's what you should do. And he said this was foretold by Daniel the prophet. So we're going to have to go back into Daniel's prophecy and see what the abomination of desolation is, okay? And it raises some questions. Hope we can have some answers for you. Thank you so much for joining me. I'll see you next time.
HeavenWord 7 is made possible by the financial support of viewers like you. Thank you.